yeah. Oh, greetings, fellow travelers. Well, since you're here, how about we talk a little about politics and how are they looking like during the crisis of COVID-19? This is state of emergency, day 23, Narva, Estonia. It's the 4th of April, it's Saturday, and I'm here on the border of the whole country. As you can see behind me, on the other side of Narva River is actually, well, Russia. Narva is situated about 211 kilometers eastwards from Tallinn, so it's approximately a 2 hour and 30-minute drive on the E20. And from here, actually, St. Petersburg is closer than, for example, Tallinn. If you turn on your TV and then just start browsing through the channels, it'll take you about 50 channels until you get to an Estonian one. Until that, it's just, what you get in St. Petersburg, basically. And that exemplifies the problem of communication, how to get the proper information to the local Russian native speakers, a minority that comprise about 29% of the whole population. So Narva is the third largest city in Estonia. There's about 60,000 people living here, and it's the biggest city in Ida-Viru County, which is the most eastern county in the country. The region is known for its oil shale mines, as well as the chemical industries and energy industry. So most of the country actually gets its electricity from here. And in the Soviet times, up to 50% of the electric production went to Russia. After the re-independence, they had to severely decrease the production since, Estonia is a small country with not that many people. Ida-Virumaa itself has about 130,000 people living here. And this place has, in a way, been sort of forgotten, at least for a long time. So all the challenges regarding integration are still very much, relevant. There are some hopeful initiatives in the last years, and it does feel like Narva is becoming a bit more alive. Two of the main promising initiatives from the last decade or so are the Narva College under Tartu University, and also the annual music festival Station Narva that's held in September, and that's run by the same folks who run the Tallinn Music Week in Tallinn. Hopefully these two examples of Tartu University, Narva College and Station Narva are just two examples of potentially a better future. It's still a very beautiful city on its own, not in the sense that it used to be before the Second World War, when a lot of local people considered it the most beautiful city in the whole Estonia, because the city was severely damaged during the Second World War. Massive bombings tore the whole place more or less down, and these days it's not really that common to find examples of architecture from the times before the Second World War. If you walk around here, then mostly what you see is quite repetitive Soviet architecture, and depending when you're coming from, it might seem depressive to you, or exotic, or just, your everyday life, because that's what it is for the 60,000 people living here. It's their home. Due to the decreasing population, it's obvious that there are those who are trying to more or less escape this place. But I do have to say that I fell in love with Narva myself this last autumn when I visited Station Narva, and I'm not the only one who thinks that this place has better times still ahead. And just to add some extra context regarding the COVID-19 outbreak, the total number of confirmed cases here in Ida-Viru County stands at 45, which means 3.3 cases per 10,000 capita. And if you compare it to example, Harju County, where the capital Tallinn is situated, then in Harju County that number, as I'm recording this, stands at 5.22. But let's get to politics, because that's why I'm here today, to talk about politics and to give you a short overview of what the system here in Estonia looks like. So we have a democratic republic here, we have a proportionate electoral system, which means that after every election, usually there's a plurality of parties that have made it to the parliament. This means that, the governments usually have to be coalition governments between very different partners, and you can see that this time around as well. After the last election, the current government that formed was anything but expected. So the parliament has 101 members. These days, of course, not every one of them will attend all the hearings, but if they have to pass any major laws, then they still need the whole majority, which means that the whole 2+2 rule really isn't that well applicable in Riigikogu. which is the parliament. So here's an overview of the parliament. The yellow ones are the Liberal Party called Reformierakond. They won the election, they have 34 seats. Then there's Keskerakond, and they're the current Prime Minister party. The third result this time around was to EKRE, which is dark blue here. They're the typical far-right party these days, or what's referred to as far-right neoconservatives. Then there's Isamaa, 12 seats, your normal conservatives. And then 10 seats for the Social Democrats, who, like everyone else, had really tough times in the last elections. And there's also one independent called Raimond Kaljulaid, who ran in Keskerakond. But after Keskerakond made the coalition with EKRE, the far-right party, then Raimond Kaljulaid quit Keskerakond and has been very critical about the government. He's also these days leaning more towards Social Democrats. So the coalition has a total of 56 votes in the current parliament, and the opposition has 45. I've already talked about some of the main players in the government, the ministers who are responsible for their fields that are affected the most, but I'll give you some extra detail. So Urmas Reinsalu is the foreign minister, and he's been charging getting Estonians back home who are still stuck abroad. He's also one of the guys who has proposed or who is on the side of mass testing, and we'll know by next week if the mass testing can be done here in Estonia, depending on whether they'll find the proper equipment needed for it. Since our population is only about 1.328 million, then this is potentially a good sort of lab experiment. Also, Reinsalu has a past of somewhat dubious sexist comments, so he's considered as like this typical old school male chauvinist. At the same time, the guy has said that, okay, maybe some of my statements haven't really been the best, and since he has his eye on the presidency potentially in the future, then I guess he's trying to show that he stands for everyone. Now, Mailis Reps, you might recall as being responsible for the education matters. She's from Keskerakond and has had busy times like everyone else in the government, because, she's reshaping the whole way that education is run these days, even though that actually the schools themselves have quite a lot of freedom of how they run this thing. She's made it clear that regular school lessons are likely to be out until May, and also that most of the crisis committee actually supports more tougher measures on battling with the virus outbreak. At the moment, Jüri Ratas, the Prime Minister of Estonia and also member of Keskerakond, leader of the party, has informed that tougher restrictions on movement, for example, are not necessary. At the same time, extra restrictions have been applied to stores. The stores now have to make sure that they have the number of clients under control, that they know how many people actually can be allowed in the store, so that they would still follow the 2+2 rule. And also there's extra limitations in the care facilities, since unfortunately the virus is running rampant there. I had to change the location a bit because of the sun, but we still have plenty of daylight, so let's go on. So Ratas made it to the worldwide media last spring when, after the elections, he formed a government together with Isamaa and EKRE. And EKRE has made it clear that they stand for the new political discourse, like Donald Trump, Viktor Orban, Marine Le Pen, among others. So they're the typical right-wing populists that you see popping up, everywhere around the world. And when this government was formed, there was a lot of public backlash as well as even protests on the streets. But the government was formed anyhow, and even though it wasn't that long ago when Mart Helme himself was more or less joking about the threat of COVID-19, then not surprisingly, EKRE these days are now the ones who are saying that the government needs to be more decisive and tough. For them, it's a good chance to show their leading capabilities during the times of crisis. And their popularity has been going up, so it would seem that a lot of people actually do want like these strong, decent men to run the show. A new law was introduced in the Interior Ministry, which states that people from third countries have to return to their homes if they lose their jobs. That is even the case if they have a visa for a longer period of time or a work permit. They're framing it as a necessary mean during this crisis, but it's not hard to imagine them beating the victory drum that they're freeing finally Estonia of immigrants. Even though in the whole migration crisis, Estonia didn't really show solidarity, and that was before EKRE even made it to government. Not surprisingly, Mart Helme has once again made it to the international media due to this law, because that's how Ratas usually makes it to international media. He has to apologize for Mart Helme's words or actions. So this time New York Times picked it up, and they were very vocal and critical about it. And I guess both wings of the political spectrum will try to take this for their own advantage, meaning that the left will just shout, "We told you so," and the right will shout fake news, hysterical media. Among those so-called strong, decent men is Martin Helme, the son of Mart Helme, who is the finance minister. It would seem the party has some hereditary traits to it because it's widely expected that Martin Helme will become the next leader of EKRE. And since he's become one of the main spokesmen of the current crisis, it won't be that surprising, even though he is a fairly controversial figure himself, maybe not as openly racist as his father, but the more clever. He will be leading the upcoming financial battle, since we're going to face severe economical downfall, and he's made it clear that we're not facing easy times because of the original 2% of growth that we were expecting. We're now looking to 8% of a recession. In GDP, I mean, if not even more. And then there is Tanel Kiik, the youngest minister in the government at 31 years of age, responsible for social affairs, which is to say everything related to healthcare and unemployment as well. He's actually one of the most liberal ones in the whole bunch, and before this whole COVID-19 crisis, he constantly opposed the statements made by Helme and the whole EKRE. But it seems the government is working more or less on the same wavelength at the moment. For example, if we compare it to the crisis of 2008 and 2009, the big financial crisis, then back then Estonia was one of the prime examples of austerity measures. Well, instead of austerity measures, most are now looking towards the public sector to keep the economy and society running. For example, some good news for the people tied to culture and sports, namely that the government's crisis package includes 25 million euros for culture and sports, since life is on hold for both of them. But if you look at the private sector, for example Tallink, then they will also be relying on the government aid. Even though they're the biggest company in Estonia, and according to Martin Helme's words, form about 2% of the country's GDP. Martin Helme has made it clear that they won't let the company go under. It's vital for us because the cargo and as well as the passengers. But since these days their business is down about 90%, then well, they need support. The connections with the Nordics, especially Finland, is crucial for Estonia. I've talked about exports before, and even though these days the connection with Finland is becoming more difficult and seems like it's going to be completely halted as far as incoming passengers to Finland are concerned, then the governments of both Estonia and Finland are still working on the exceptions to make sure that at least some traffic is still running. Some more good news is that the government just secured a shipment from China that includes 1.5 million masks, 500,000 pair of gloves, 30,000 FFP2 respirators, as well as 20,000 protective gowns and 5,000 goggles. And this in the times when governments are basically outbidding each other. It's like a massive hectic eBay auction with every man or country for themselves. Societies closing themselves off is posing a question that how long can this thing last and what will be the new normality after all this is over. Italy has already passed its peak and it looks like Europe in the whole is getting there as well, even though a lot of countries still have the hardest days at hand. Much attention has been on Sweden, that has taken quite a different and more open route with lesser restrictions. But even they have now added extra limitations to their citizens, which is not surprising, since the spread is still growing there, and Sweden also in the last days announced its biggest number of new cases as well as biggest number of deaths on Wednesday. If you compare, for example, the deaths per million people, which is one of the measurements that you can really see how bad the spread is in the country, then Sweden in the region is unfortunately in the sad first place with 36.65 deaths per million people. How different this number will end up being will of course be one of the main keys comparing the different countries and their approaches once this whole thing is over. And that will also tell us whether the restriction had any use, and if so, how great the use was or wasn't. Most European countries are not taking any chances because the examples of Italy and Spain are dire warnings that no one really wants to repeat. So just for reference, the deaths per million people in Spain is at 239 and in Italy at 243. We can find some relief in the fact that Italy, like I mentioned, has already passed its peak, and it does look like Spain is coming close to it as well. But this brings us to a more broader question about which direction will our societies head in the future. To a more closed setting or a potentially more open setting with more international cooperation. And where better to ask this question than on the border of the whole European Union. Here in Estonia, a country that was under foreign rule, foreign occupation for decades, getting our independence back was, well, a massive, massive victory that a lot of people really didn't even dare to dream of. Getting to Europe, belonging to the European Union, was one of the main goals that we took once we gained our independence. But these days we have to ask ourselves, what is this Europe that we belong to? And what do we want it to be like? Can there be a common understanding of Europe between countries as different as Sweden, Estonia, Hungary, Italy? And if so, then still, what are the future for our privacies as well as our freedoms? We know that at the moment, anonymous metadata for phones is already being tracked here in Estonia, that is to combat the spread of the virus. And they've made it clear that it's only for the time of the crisis. But what about countries and governments that might take advantage of these new powers that the crisis has handed to them? For example, in Hungary, Orban's state of emergency doesn't really have a strict time limit to it. Here in Estonia, we know that currently it's until the 1st of May, and the president, for example, has made it clear that if this should be extended, it shouldn't be done more than 1 month at a time. I mean, I think it would be unimaginable that in Estonia something like a limitless state of emergency even could be declared. There would be massive public outcry as well as protests. Well, maybe not when there's a pandemic going on, but... Well, I called my good friend Mihkel Kaevats, who works for the local government of Tallinn under the city planning, and also has done some research about the rise of fascism in Italy before the Second World War. Also, Mihkel is a poet. So, ding ding! Hey Mihkel, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. I happen to have a lot of time on my hands. Like, I'm not busy anymore, and that's quite cool, actually. I think it's a good break from before I asked from people how are they, and the most common answer was that I'm busy. I think nobody's busy anymore, except for some people, of course.
But so you still go to the office regularly?
No.
Okay.
I work from home, which is great for me. I'm used to it. I've been a freelancer for 15 years, and I'm very much used to working at home, so I like it. Although I miss people a bit.
Maybe you can tell a couple of words about your job as well.
Well, my day job is writing a strategy for Tallinn until 2035. So I'm from one hand I'm a writer, and from the other hand I'm an activist. I've been active in a bicycle union and in a local neighborhood society. So I at some point decided to in order to fulfill my dreams that I have for Tallinn, which is a beautiful city, but sometimes you cannot see it. I applied for a job and I got it. So it's a cool job in this way that I get to invent. It's a tedious job because I get to convince people all over again that maybe we should do the things that we have already promised to do. For example, to complete bicycle tracks in the city and to make it more pedestrian friendly, and so on.
You mentioned activism yourself, and indeed you're, I think, the most politically active person that I know myself. And that's also why I wanted to talk with you about the political aspect of this whole crisis that's going on. We know that there's been different debates.
To say that I'm not so active anymore. I've organized protests. I've been very streetwise doing stuff, but I'm actually quite lazy. As of late, I participate in protests against the far right government and everything, but I don't organize them anymore. So maybe I get to at some point again. I guess it's a typical point in time where all the possibilities are open, and I think even more possibilities than in a normal crisis, let's say. And this is why our imagination takes us to like this kind of very bleak 1984 vision, and then it takes us to some kind of this kind of humanist paradise where like the growing inequality is lessening and everything. One thing is for sure right now, that we are much more forced to think about like this kind of basic human values, like the real stuff that matter in life. So maybe next time somebody thinks of like, I'm gonna get a new widescreen TV, maybe he will think again and then say like, well, my present widescreen TV is already good enough, and maybe I don't need a new one or a new iPhone or whatever. At the same time, like, there is no guarantee at all for any of this happening at its own. So I think this point in time, as all these kind of explosive moments in history, it's a time definitely for raising your voice. So I think this kind of situation creates a lot of possibilities, and now it's up to us or up to somebody else to actualize a vision.
How about your take on how our government has tackled this issue? You mentioned as well that you took part in the protests against the government that included EKRE, but do you think that they managed to lead the crisis adequately, or have there been any bigger mistakes?
Well, I think as for the crisis handling, I think it's been above average, let's say. I cannot lament. I'm not sure that I could have made better decisions myself. So I think it's quite okay, especially if you look at the infection rate, and it's still quite early to say something how well we are doing, but it seems obvious that we are doing better than the USA, where the federal government headed by Trump is completely denying the problem, or now like admitting it more, but still fluctuating on the ideas. I think that Tanel Kiik, our social minister, is a decent person. I do. And I think he is doing a good job, more or less, in this situation. But I must say that there are some things that are being done under the cover of the emergency situation, and like we must not stay like silent on these. One of these things is that the government is fucking up our pension schemes. So mine and yours, not my mother's, but mine and yours. So they are again taking away the state part in the Estonian pension scheme, which means that instead of saving up 6% every month, we'll be saving with you and me and everybody else from 1983 on, will be saving 2% instead of 6%. I think it's in a bad sense, like bad governance in everything, because I'm not an investor, but like this sounds quite basic to me, that when the prices are down, it's the time to put your money in it. It seems like a complete utter madness taking the money away at this kind of moment. But the second thing that I see, as you know, well, I'm quite like against this kind of fossil fuel investments, and that the government is investing like more than 100 million euros into oil shale, oil production. Is I think again using the emergency to do something that is completely unnecessary, that is completely going the wrong way. We will make this investment, then in order to fuel this new oil factory, we will have to open another mine, in about 7-8 years, which will cost like about 300 million euros, and all this in the framework that fossil fuels really are not sustainable. I've spoken to people from the east of Estonia, where the oil shale production is going on, and like actually it comes out that also the old generation, not to speak of the new one, is not a fan that they are the epicenter of this kind of anachronistic energy production. They would actually look forward, but inside the government there is, or inside the establishment, not only the government, there is like this kind of understanding that it's super important for the social stability of the Eastern Estonian regions to actually like invest into this oil shale and everything. It doesn't have to be like that. It's a fucking dead end, and it's a disgrace. I think this is abuse of power also. It doesn't seem that they are going to use the emergency situation in order to like install an autocratic government like Hungary has used it. But nevertheless, they are using this situation in order to do nonsense, bullshit, and demagogic activities that we are not worried about right now. We are worried about other stuff.
I wanted to also ask about your connection with Italy, since you have some past with Italy, and how does the situation there look like to you?
They were late, definitely, but if you think about it, like I think our response has also been quite good, because we have been able to learn on the Italians. They were on the forefront of it, the first democratic society to be hit so hard. So I think their like this kind of learning curve made our learning curve also a bit like lower and faster. It's really true that Italy has been like in this kind of locked in politically and structurally for a very long time. I think like maybe there will be some kind of opening, and somebody who will say that it's not only the politicians, it's us. We have to like make some real changes. We have to like restart our thinking, not the economy only, but the thinking. And Italy is a rich country. It's a beautiful country. It's a very resourceful country. Like in Estonia, there is this kind of, I think, commonplace understanding that the Italians are very lazy. But it is one of the biggest economies in the world, and lazy people cannot, productive people get to be rich. So in our capitalist world, so I really hope that they will have a chance to restart after this. Then it will also have something good in it. Otherwise, it's only like sad and bullshit and so on.
Okay, thank you, Mihkel, for these insights. It was really nice to talk to you after all these weeks. And I wish you all the best for these tough times.
For me, still, these times are not tough, but I know people for whom it is. So let's hope for the best for everybody.
So that was Mihkel. Thanks, Mihkel, as always. And just to wrap things up for this time, let's have a quick glance at the numbers. And let's not forget that these are just not numbers. Behind every single digit, there's someone's life, whether it's a case or whether it's a fatality. So recently the health board made some adjustments in their data. It was also changed in coronakaart.ee, and I made the changes myself accordingly as well. So this has slightly changed the daily case numbers, has evened them out. There was a spike last week, over 100 new cases, but that was actually consisting of cases from different days. And as you can see, we just had our biggest day on Thursday, 93 new cases, and we also had our biggest increase in daily deaths, being 6 on Wednesday. This means that the total number of cases in Estonia has now surpassed the 1,000 mark. To be more precise, it's 1,018, and the number of total deaths stands at the moment at 13. I mentioned before in Narva, well, I'm back in my living room now, that Italy has already passed the peak point. As you can see from this chart, it's basically 2 weeks since they had the biggest increase in new cases. It will take time until there's a major decrease in these numbers, but what matters is that the trend seems to be going down. You can also see that it's been more than a week since they had the toughest day as far as new deaths go. If you look at the chart for Spain, then it looks somewhat similar. It's not exponentially growing anymore. It's more or less stabilizing, while there's still some tough days ahead. Spain just a few days ago had its biggest numbers, both in new cases and deaths. It would still seem that things should hopefully get a bit less horrible. Also a brief look at the European charts. Since the last time I did them, I think it was the video I did on day 15 in Paide. And after that you can see that European new cases have basically stabilized as well, but still there is an increase in the daily deaths. We just had the blackest days so far with the number exceeding 5,000, but there is, as we know, a delay, meaning that after new cases it takes time until those cases start developing severe symptoms. So hopefully that number shouldn't be getting much worse. The total cases in Europe have now surpassed the 500,000 mark, and the total number of deaths the 40,000 mark. If we look at the same period for the whole world, so that would be the last 9 days, then we can see that it's still slightly increasing, but that's largely due to the spread really taking its hold over the United States of America. So today we just had the biggest number of new cases and daily deaths in the world so far. The silver lining here being that the growth is not as sharp anymore, since things are more or less stabilizing in Europe. The total number of COVID-19 cases around the world has now surpassed the 1 million mark. Just 9 days ago that number was a bit more than 500,000 or 500,000. And if you look at both the total cases and deaths, then you can see that in the last 9 days it's basically doubled, which means that the total number of deaths have now surpassed the 50,000 mark. Like I mentioned, then this is at least partly or even largely due to the United States. While in Europe things seem to be getting under control somewhat, then if you look at the United States, you can see that it's still in the exponential growth phase, meaning that basically every new day brings a new record in both the new cases and deaths. How long this will last in the States, it's hard to tell, but there's definitely going to be some very difficult weeks ahead for them. Numbers are just numbers, but they can show us something relevant, which also might be something that we'd want to escape from, but that wouldn't really make things better for any one of us. So stay strong, and if you're looking for a movie to watch, then, well, maybe you could try Richard Linklater's Waking Life from 2001. It's basically like this dreamy, trippy movie through the main character's subconscious, and well, a lot of the questions that he's asking from himself are questions I think that a lot of us are facing at the moment. And well, not only at the moment, but generally in life. Also, I just made a blog for some of the photos that I've done during these daily trips, so if you're interested, feel free to check it out. You can find the link from the description. And for the time being, I'll be continuing doing these video updates twice a week. So take care, and until the next time.